Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch. President Trump, in the wake of his military strike against Venezuela, in which military officials captured the president of the country, Nicolas Maduro, and renditioned him and his wife to New York to stand trial for violating U.S. drug laws while serving as president of a foreign country, has now amassed a massive military armada near Iran. And now he's threatening to launch a major attack against that country. What is the rationale for this? Well, there are various possible rationales. Various explanations have been given. One is that they're going to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear capability. But wait a minute. Didn't President Trump's military already obliterate their nuclear capability with a bombing attack not so long ago, like a few months ago? Isn't that what he told us, that the military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities was a tremendous success, and that we don't need to concern ourselves anymore with Iran's nuclear capability? So what's this all about? What's he saying? That strike was not a success after all? Another possibility from what we hear is that he wants to help the protesters. But it's not real clear how he's going to do that. I mean, clearly they want regime change there. President Trump and the U.S. national security establishment, specifically the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. But achieving a regime change is quite a different story in Iran as compared to Venezuela. Now, if it's just a full military war that they want, which is very possible, it's not going to be difficult to knock out and defeat Iran. I know that in the mainstream press they're saying, oh, this could be a major war and all this. I don't buy that at all. This is a hollowed out third world country. It's been hollowed out by decades of U.S. sanctions. And they don't have the capability of fighting the U.S. military. If Trump launches a major attack there, an invasion of the country, Iran's going to fold. That's my humble opinion here. I said the same thing about Venezuela. I said that their army will never fight the U.S. Army. They've been hollowed out by sanctions. And sure enough, they didn't fight back. Now, Trump's running the country through his agent, effective agent, Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president of Venezuela. And she's following orders, and one can understand why. That if she doesn't, they've got a potential criminal indictment hanging over her head, and she'll be captured and renditioned over to New York, the same as her predecessor. So she doesn't want that. And then, of course, there's that siege threat where they cut off Venezuela's oil imports or exports, any money coming from there. And so massive starvation, same like the Roman Empire used to have these sieges around these castles where there were rebels or opponents were conglomerating, and they would just starve them out until they finally surrendered. So that's not going to happen with Iran. I don't think. I can't see them doing that. I can't see them surrendering and becoming agents of the U.S. empire. And if Trump launches a full-scale invasion, I think they can easily win. I don't think the Iranian army is any match. And so it may even be done as a picker-upper for the U.S. military. I mean, the military needs a picker-upper. I mean, look, you've got Vietnam, which was, quite a devastating defeat there. They sacrificed 58,000 American men of my generation for nothing. I mean, that was the Cold War racket where they said, well, we have to do this because the Reds will come and get us. Well, the Reds were never coming to get us. It was all just a racket to support the existence of the national security state, which America's federal government had been converted to, with the rationalization that the Reds were coming to get us, and this was the only way to prevent the Reds from doing that. And the Korean War was fought to a stalemate. Both wars were fought, of course, without the constitutionally required congressional declaration of war. And then you've got Afghanistan, 20 years of lies and wars there in Afghanistan, total waste of American life as well as Afghan life. And the U.S. government, exited involuntarily. And so that was a total waste of life and money. And then Iraq, same thing. I mean, total waste. All they did was, with Iraqi Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom was put in a pro-Iranian regime. And, of course, Iran's considered the official enemy, as we can see with this armada. So that all that whole hullabaloo about Iraq, they end up installing a regime that is sympathetic and friendly to the Iranian government. And notice that nobody's going on vacation to Iraq, at least from the United States are not. Members of Congress certainly aren't. I mean, this is their model, Operation Iraqi Freedom. If it's such a, free paradise now because of that invasion and occupation, how come nobody's going on vacation there from the United States? So they need a picker-upper, and I think this strike against Venezuela, it's a big picker-upper. I mean, you strike these third world countries that have been hollowed out with sanctions, and you build it up and say, oh my gosh, this is a brilliant military battle. And then you've got the battles against the boat people, where they are just killing these people in these boats, supposedly because they're violating U.S. drug laws, even though they're hundreds of miles away on the high seas. Or near Venezuelan waters or Colombian waters. But, that conjures up images of the Battle of Midway during World War II when U.S. forces were battling Japanese destroyers and aircraft carriers and everything. And so, battling these boats and killing the occupants and not suffering any casualties, this has got to be a big picker-upper for the military. And, maybe attacking in Grenada would be another possibility here. They did that, several years ago where they invaded Grenada, and man, there was all these, celebrations, and we could have another parade in Washington honoring the military if there was another conquest of Grenada. And of course, we see it now with Cuba. They're picking on, Cuba again. Well, they've continued to pick on Cuba since the Cuban Revolution. But now they've got this siege. They're not letting oil into Cuba, and they're waiting for the regime to fall. And they're going to say, "Well, this is a result of our embargo that's been on there for 60-something years or something like that." But it's a picker-upper. You can say, "You see, man, we look what we did with our military and our CIA and our NSA," and the same thing with Iran. I think that could be considered a big picker-upper. I think it's important to remind ourselves of how we got to this Iran situation. Because the interventionists are over here talking about how great this military interventionism is and how successful it is. And they're crowing about this whole thing in Venezuela, which is, to me, is really bizarre. Because here the U.S. government is partnering, maintaining in existence a communist socialist regime. I've said this before, but it really bears repeating. It is so ironic. That it's an illegitimate regime. It hasn't been legitimately elected. And it's a national security state. And that's why it's being maintained, because it's stable. You see, dictatorships can be very stable because they have all the power. They have all the guns. And so, forget all those dissidents. I was wondering what would happen if these dissidents leveled an attack on the Venezuelan government. Like a deadly attack with guns, killing government officials and the military and so forth. In other words, what if they revolted? Like a revolution, which they have a right to do. Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence that whenever any government becomes destructive of the legitimate ends of the people, meaning liberty, democracy, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish that government with force if necessary. That's why the Americans revolted against the British Empire. So if the Venezuelan dissidents were to revolt against the regime, they would essentially be revolting against the U.S. government as well, the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, which is just really a mind blower, because they would then be furious at these people, and I have no doubts they would be supporting Delcy Rodriguez and her narco-terrorist socialist communist regime to put down these people. Now, under pressure, she's been releasing some of the people that she's put in jail for protesting, and they're saying, "Oh, this is a new day. This is a new day." But they've made it very clear that this is on condition that they don't go out and start protesting again. And as far as Marina Corina Machado, who's the leader of all this thing, who Trump is dissed, she's the one that gave her Nobel Prize to Trump, hoping that he would change his mind and put her in power instead, even though she hasn't been elected anything either. But they've dissed her, and the Venezuelan government, with this Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, saying that if she comes in, she's going to be into the country, she's going to be prosecuted. And why is she going to be prosecuted? Because they will prosecute anybody who supported the U.S. intervention that resulted in the capture of Maduro, who supported the sanctions, who supported the military armada there, that supported any kind of regime change operation. That's a criminal offense under Venezuelan law. The law is established by this socialist, communist, terrorist, narco regime. And don't forget that the guy that is in charge of putting down all these protests, he's under criminal indictment himself by the U.S. government. As far as I know, neither Trump or the CIA or the NSA or the Pentagon are demanding that Rodriguez extradite this guy, which is really weird. I mean, he's under indictment for drug war violations. That's all they're doing over with Mexico, trying to pressure Mexico into either capturing or killing or raiding or extraditing drug lords. And here's this guy who's under criminal indictment. I think there's a reward out for him. I think the U.S. government put out a reward for him. Here, all they got to do is order Rodriguez to send this guy, put this guy on a plane and send him. But they don't do that. I mean, it just shows you how hypocritical this whole interventionist racket is. And I want to go back in history, though, to show the roots of this Iranian thing, because it has its roots in interventionism. And this is what the interventionists do not want to talk about. They want to talk about 1979, when the Iranians revolted against the Shah of Iran, and they took U.S. diplomats hostage. And so that's where history starts for U.S. interventionists. Oh, the Iranians took the U.S. diplomats hostage. This is horrible, horrible. And it was horrible. But they don't explain why they did that. And so I want to explain it, because I think it's important to understand that the U.S. government, specifically the U.S. national security establishment, is ultimately responsible for what's going on right now with respect to the U.S. and Iran. And I think that's part of the motivation here, too. We all assume that Trump's calling the shots. I'm not sure that that's an extremely valid assumption. I've long held that in our form of government, the real power is the national security branch of the government, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. That's where the force is. And they permit Trump or any president and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, the Congress, to maintain the veneer of power, to act like they're in power. But really, the shots are being called by the national security establishment. Now, here, Trump is fit in perfectly. I mean, so it looks like it's all one mindset. But, remember, Trump ran against this kind of stuff. He ran against the deep state, which is the national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. He said he was going to drain the swamp. He said it again and again. And he's going to oppose these forever wars and foreign interventions and America first and all this. And yet, he's essentially, in my opinion, been absorbed by the national security establishment. He's part of them. They're all on the same page now. So it appears like Trump's calling the shots. He may well be, but I think there's another distinct possibility, and that is that it's the national security branch of the government based on what happened years ago. they still haven't gotten over it any more than they've gotten over what happened years ago in Cuba, like at the Bay of Pigs when Castro's army defeated the CIA invaders there. I don't think they've ever gotten over it. They've never gotten over that their assassination attempts against Castro never worked, that their terrorism inside Cuba never worked to achieve regime change. In fact, before I get over to the Iran history, though, I got to read you something. This is really funny. Okay, this is an article that appeared in Bloomberg, and it's titled "Mexico's Cuba Obsession Puts Its President in a Bind with Trump." Okay, and I notice that term, Mexico's Cuba Obsession. I mean, I laugh when I read that. And what the author, Gonzalo Soto, is saying here is that Mexico has had a long-time relationship with Cuba. They've not had any embargo. They don't make it a criminal offense to travel to Cuba like the U.S. government does with Americans and spend money there. And they've shipped oil to Cuba. They've had, in other words, friendly relations. This is the kind of relations that President Kennedy wanted to establish when he got murdered. He was going to establish friendly relations just the same way that Mexico has. And they're criticizing the Sheinbaum for having this long-term relationship, and they're saying, that Mexico has been leftist and it sympathizes with this leftist regime. Of course, there's been right-wing regimes in Mexico that have maintained the friendly relationship as well. They have a difficult time explaining that. But Claudia Sheinbaum explains it, and she says she draws a clear distinction between the regime and the Cuban people. And this is what a lot of interventionists just do not understand. Let me see if I can find it. Sheinbaum told reporters on February 4th, "There's nothing hidden, nothing shady, nothing wrong being done. Mexico has always supported Cuba, even under the most authoritarian Mexican governments." Asked about Cuba's single-party system and lack of democracy, Sheinbaum refused to denounce or even acknowledge either fact. "That's your opinion," she says. This is quote, "That's your opinion. There are different ones and we respect them," she said. "You can support or not Cuba's regime, but the Cuban people are the Cuban people, and Mexico doesn't abandon anyone." You see, it's the Cuban people who have paid the price and continue to pay the price of the U.S. sanctions, the embargo, because it targets them, and this siege, this oil siege, is targeting them with death, by starvation, by illness. They are suffering mightily, and so she's, saying, "I want to help the Cuban people out here." And so this writer, or Bloomberg, is calling this a Cuba obsession, which is really funny, because the real obsession has been the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. They've been obsessed with Cuba ever since the Cuban Revolution, under this notion that the Reds were coming to get us. That's how it started. The Reds are coming, and this is a communist outpost. Even though Cuba has never taken any aggressive action against the United States. They've never attacked. They've never invaded. They've never tried to assassinate our president or anyone else. All they've said is, just leave us alone. But the U.S. government has not been able to leave them alone because of this obsession, which this guy apparently doesn't, at least he doesn't seem to acknowledge it in his article. That's the real obsession. Why not leave somebody alone that wants to be left alone? Okay? But they wouldn't leave him alone. They were the ones trying to assassinate. They are the ones that launched terrorist attacks inside Cuba. They killed real people. And, of course, since they were just Cubans, they don't count anymore, like those people in the high seas in the boats. They don't count. They're just Venezuelans. They're Latin Americans. And then there's the embargo that has just squeezed the life out of the Cuban people, in conjunction with the socialism. There's no question but it's like a vice, socialism and the embargo, because most people can survive under just a pure socialist system. They survive in North Korea under a pure socialist system, and they figure out ways to survive. But when you've got this vice of the embargo or oil blockade, that's when people, and socialism on the other side, that's when people start dying. So Scheinbaum has now been pressured into stopping any more oil shipments under this oil siege, with the idea that they're going to kill the Cuban people in the hopes that they'll rise up in a violent revolution and finally oust the Cuban regime. And she's just saying, we're going to help the Cuban people. She's bowed to the pressure of the tariffs. Trump has said that any country that ships oil to Cuba will be subject to high tariffs. I don't know if that's affected by the U.S. Supreme Court decision or not, but in any event, she has succumbed to that pressure, unfortunately, and now she's just sending in humanitarian aid. Now, it's coming from the government. As a libertarian, we would never back such a thing, but what I found funny about the article was that just because she has normal relations, the author calls that an obsession. He would have said the same thing about John Kennedy. If Kennedy had lived, he would have reestablished normalized relations with Cuba and the Soviet Union. That was what his peace speech at American University was all about. And he was moving America in a new direction, I guess. The author would say, well, Kennedy was obsessed with peace. But anyway, so let's go back to Iran. We need to go back to 1953, and interventionists hate this. They just hate it when you don't start with 1979. We'll get to 79, but it starts with 53, and it, again, involves oil. Isn't that a coincidence? Because oil is a big factor in Venezuela, as we ultimately learned. It wasn't just about the drug war or narco-terrorism or socialism or communism. Oil's played a big role here too, because let's face it, the national security establishment needs oil, massive amounts of oil. This armada that's now over there near Iran threatening to launch a major attack, that needs a lot of oil every day. And so Iran was a big oil producer, but they were doing it through the British Empire in the 1950s and before, early 1950s. So Iran has a democratically elected prime minister. They had a democracy. It was an experiment with democracy. And so Mohammad Mossadegh was the prime minister, Time Magazine Man of the Year, highly respected, very admired in Iran. He decides to nationalize the oil industry from the British. Now, okay, as libertarians, we'd never support nationalization, but every government nationalizes. That's one of the risks of doing business in a foreign country. It's a risk here. I mean, remember, Franklin Roosevelt nationalized the gold coins of the American people, which is and was the official money of the American people under the U.S. Constitution. So he nationalizes it, and the British get furious over this, naturally, but he gets rid of them so that they can't do anything. And so the British come to the CIA and they say, would you help us get our oil back? And it was Truman, was it? I can't remember. The first president they went to said no. Forget who, I think it was Truman. And so then the next president, who I think was Eisenhower, got my history right, says yes, he authorized it. So the CIA goes and initiates a coup that destroys Iran's democratic system. They oust Mossadegh from power. He ends up under house arrest for the rest of his life. And they install the unelected, brutal dictator, the Shah of Iran, with full power, omnipotent power. Now, he doesn't have to respond to a Congress. He doesn't have to respond to a Supreme Court. He has full powers to do whatever he wants, including putting down protesters. Okay? And he had a brutal national police force that was a combination CIA, Pentagon, FBI, ICE, Border Patrol. I mean, it was all one, and it was trained by the CIA. The CIA helped the Shah put it together, and man, they were brutal. They put down protesters and dissidents and round them up, incarcerate them, torture them, kill them, whatever. I mean, it was just a brutal tyranny under which the Iranian people were suffering because of this CIA coup. Now, the British got their oil back under the Shah. They were happy. And so this goes along, and the U.S. loves it because the Shah is all pro-U.S. You know, he's loyal, very loyal. He's not like Delcy Rodriguez, in Venezuela, she is not loyal. She is not in love with the U.S. I guarantee you that. She's following orders, but she's not this born-again capitalist. I guarantee you that. She's an avowed Marxist, and she's just complying with orders. Now, and that's what Maria Corina Machado said, that she's just following Trump's orders. I don't think anybody questions that. But in any event, the Shah is loyal. He does whatever the U.S. wants him to, but he maintains full tyrannical power inside the country. So, as I mentioned earlier, Jefferson's point, people have a right to revolt. They revolted. And you know, when people revolt, there's a good likelihood of a big loss of life. But the Shah happened to be in New York for medical treatment. I think he had cancer or something. And so they revolted, and they took these diplomats hostage because they were afraid that the U.S. was going to reinstall the Shah into power. So they were using the diplomats as hostages, saying, don't you even think about bringing the Shah back because we've got these people as hostages. And so then that's where the Ayatollah comes in. They unfortunately do not get their democratic system back. The Ayatollah comes in and establishes in this chaos, in this revolution, this religious theocracy that arguably is worse tyranny than the Shah. I mean, you can even see some of the protesters now are, you know, have signs praising the Shah. So it's like out of the frying pan into the fire. But that's the reason why they revolted, because the Shah was so tyrannical. Now, again, the U.S. national security establishment loved the Shah. They helped him with this brutality. They believed in putting down these people. So when the revolution came, naturally, the revolutionaries were anti-U.S. because of what the U.S. had done to their system. But they were not able to bring back the Mossadegh kind of power of person. They end up with this religious theocracy, brutal religious theocracy. But then that's what starts the U.S. down this road. And, okay, if Iran's trying to get a nuclear weapon, it's because they know that the U.S. wants to oust them. And that's the problem with having this big interventionist military machine, is that every country that wants to stand independent knows that it's going to be a target of the empire. Look at North Korea. Do you see Trump jacking with North Korea anymore? No. Okay, remember he did in his first term. He jacked with North Korea, and then all of a sudden, you know, became friendly with the dictator there because North Korea has nuclear weapons. Well, so what you do with this aggressive military machine, interventionist machine, is you give the incentive to every country that wants to be independent to get nuclear weapons. I mean, that's the dark irony of having this kind of interventionist national security state system. So here we are. I mean, year after year, decade after decade, with this constant crisis. I mean, think about it. All our lives, I mean, I'm much older than most of y'all, but all my life is crisis. We live under this life of constant crisis, chaos, terrorists here today, terrorists more tomorrow, war here, intervention is there, kidnapping here, killing drug lords over here. And I mean, it's just total chaos under which we lived. And this is the kind of system under which we live. Okay, we live under a national security state, interventionist, militarist system, with one that Martin Luther King called the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And he's right. No one can deny it. This is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. We mustn't lose sight of that fact. And so what do we do about it? We do some soul searching. Now, we can keep doing it. I've been saying this for 36 years at FFF. You want this way of life, just keep these systems in place. But if you want something different, if you want a normal life, a non-chaos filled life, no more perpetual war for perpetual peace, no more interventionism, no more national security statism. If you want just a limited government republic with a free market, peaceful, harmonious relations with the people of the world, that requires some soul searching. And that's what we do at FFF. We show what needs to be done. What are the prerequisites for achieving this? And as a hint, it ain't reform. The system does not go away with reform. An evil, immoral system, which is what we have, or actually multiple systems, as I'm pointing out in my new series, The Evil Within. You have multiple systems that are immoral, repugnant, evil, deadly, destructive, disharmonious, horrific. And if you want to move America in a better direction, which is what we want to do here at FFF, and if y'all are listening to this, the likelihood is that you want it too. You want a society of peace and freedom and harmony and normality, then it's time to do some soul searching with the idea of ridding our nation of this evil, immoral, repugnant, deadly, destructive systems and putting America on the road toward a limited government republic, a free market system, and peaceful and harmonious relations with the people of the world. That's Trump Watch. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, thank you for your great support of FFF. I look forward to seeing you next week.